On a rainy October morning, the gates to Queen Elizabeth II's private chapel were sealed. No press release, no official announcement. But royal insiders whispered of a sudden, unexplained banishment, not of a servant or aide, but of Queen Camilla herself. What was so sacred, so controversial, that even the Queen Consort was locked out of Her Majesty's most intimate sanctuary? Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began as a routine commemoration, a discreet gathering inside Windsor, where the royal family would lay quiet tributes in remembrance of the Queen's spiritual life. The chapel, known for its silence, rarely hosted guests, let alone the public. Yet this time, something was different. Tension crackled through the air, whispers passed between aides, and then came the decision that set fire to every corridor of power. Camilla was not to be allowed inside. Just hours before she was due to arrive, a revised security briefing was delivered to the guards stationed near the chapel's arched entrance. The instruction was not vague. It was targeted, precise. Block the Queen Consort. Let no one through on her behalf. No explanation was offered, only a repetition of command. And so, when her motorcade arrived, the atmosphere shifted from reverent to surreal. Camilla, dressed in ceremonial black, stepped out and was met not by reverence, but by resistance. She didn't shout, she didn't question, she simply turned. But what observers couldn't ignore was the pale stillness in her face. The woman who had battled decades of scandal, who had risen from mistress to monarchy, now found herself rejected at the very altar of remembrance. And still the palace said nothing. News outlets speculated, but the real insiders, those who had seen the Queen's final days, already understood. This wasn't about protocol, it wasn't about public perception, it was something deeper, something almost spiritual. The chapel wasn't just a room, it was a sanctum loaded with meaning, a space built on pain, forgiveness and secrets never meant to be seen. And now it was closed. But the signs had been there all along. A cryptic floral wreath appeared at the door that very morning. Pale lilies mixed with Scottish thistle bound by a lavender ribbon. It bore no card, no signature, but sources confirmed it had come from Princess Anne's private estate. And that detail, small as it seemed, was the clue that unraveled everything. The Queen's only daughter had always been the most silent, the most stoic. But now she was stepping out from the shadows with a purpose that no one could yet understand. What power did Anne possess that could override the very wife of the king? And more terrifying, what truth had she been holding on to all this time? But what could justify such a dramatic royal rebuke? The answer lay buried not in protocol, but in a final, secret instruction Anne had sworn to reveal only after her mother's death. They called her the Steely One Princess Anne, loyal to the end. But what no one knew was that she carried a weight heavier than duty, a private confession from the Queen, whispered in the twilight hours of Balmoral. An oath that would one day force Anne to defy her own brother's wife and risk fracturing the monarchy forever. It happened in 1991, away from the cameras, during one of the Queen's rare solo walks along the Balmoral estate. When she returned to the drawing room, she summoned Anne. No aides, no footmen, just mother and daughter. The Queen, never one for sentimentality, didn't speak in regal commands that day. She spoke with the voice of a woman deeply aware that history could be rewritten not by what she left behind, but by who she left it to. And in that moment, she entrusted Anne with something no crown could carry, a personal legacy, a spiritual preservation, and a line never meant to be crossed. Her words were clear: under no condition was Camilla to ever alter the spiritual essence of her reign. Not through words, not through appearances, and certainly not through the sacred spaces Elizabeth held dear. Anne, stunned but resolute, made a promise. One clause, one condition. She would act only after the Queen's passing. It was a vow that would bind her in silence for decades, through scandal, through remarriage, through the slow rehabilitation of Camilla in the public eye. Anne said nothing. She bore it all: the uncomfortable photo ops, the family holidays where alliances quietly shifted, and the persistent rebranding of Camilla from outsider to consort. But inside, Anne carried a sealed envelope and a decree in her own hand. hidden inside a locket that never left her side. Fast forward to the week of the Queen's funeral, and those who looked closely could see the cracks in Anne's composure. She was stoic, yes, but too still, too distant, as though the weight of 1,000 unspoken words was pressing down on her spine. She wasn't grieving like the others. She was preparing. Every glance she exchanged with palace officials, every silent nod with clergy was part of a plan long ago forged in whispered twilight, because Anne knew that once Elizabeth was laid to rest, the vow would come due. That week she visited the chapel alone, no photographers, no schedule. Inside, she opened the locket. The decree was simple but resolute. It bore her signature, but its voice was the Queen's. And when Anne placed it into the royal steward's hand, the course of history bent. A hidden instruction became royal edict. And in doing so, Anne didn't just honor her mother, she ignited a storm. And when that moment did arrive, Anne didn't hesitate. But the unveiling would not only shake Camilla, it would send tremors through the entire royal household. Hours before Camilla was to lay a ceremonial wreath inside the Queen's chapel, Anne handed a velvet folder to the royal steward. Inside, a letter sealed with the Queen's crest, dated 2 years before her death. Its content? So explosive it was immediately copied, filed and restricted by Royal Legal Counsel. Its first sentence, under no circumstance shall Camilla. The letter, penned in the Queen's distinct, unwavering script, was not the kind passed down through advisors or filtered by protocol. It was personal, sharp, final. Authenticated by a senior clergyman and witnessed in solemn secrecy, it bore the full force of Elizabeth's spiritual will. For years it had been quietly safeguarded in a locked drawer within Windsor's inner sanctum, its presence known only to 3 people, Elizabeth, Anne, and the chaplain, who had witnessed its signing. And yet, its release was timed with absolute precision, waiting for the hour when Camilla believed she had finally arrived. In the letter, Elizabeth made clear her intent. Camilla was to be barred from entering the private chapel under any circumstance. Not out of malice, but from what she called irreconcilable spiritual differences and a conscience beyond duty. The words carried centuries of weight, but none more powerful than those next few lines, where Elizabeth described the chapel as not a royal chamber, but a personal refuge carved from grief and memory. A space built on private sorrow, not public legacy. What made this revelation even more devastating was what the public had never been told. The Queen's private chapel held within it an altar donated by Diana in the 1980s. A silent gesture, gifted at the height of her despair, and accepted by Elizabeth without ceremony or acknowledgement. The altar remained undocumented, unphotographed, known only to a small circle of clergy and royal aides sworn to secrecy. For Elizabeth, it became a symbol not of division, but of pain endured. And that pain, she believed, must remain untouched by the woman she once considered the architect of that agony. The letter did not ask, it instructed. The tone, though regal, bore the unmistakable finality of a mother still reckoning with betrayal, long buried. Palace officials scrambled. Some advised a delay, perhaps a quiet revision of the Queen's posthumous wishes. But Anne was unmoved. With steady resolve, she overruled hesitation and invoked the clause Elizabeth herself had named instruction of conscience, a rare and binding measure that gave Anne the right to act on her mother's behalf without the consent of the reigning monarch. Within minutes, orders were executed. The wreath-laying was cancelled, the chapel sealed. Camilla, already en route, was informed discreetly by her private secretary. No public statement followed, no clarification was offered. But the silence was deafening. The revelation of the Queen's final decree sent Buckingham into quiet chaos. Phone lines lit up, legal teams convened, and behind the palace walls, a silent question pulsed like a tremor. What else had the Queen written? What other truths were still waiting in sealed drawers, untouched folders and velvet-lined boxes? But while the institution tried to contain the fallout, one person remained eerily calm. Camilla. There were no tears, no tantrums, just a sharp turn of the shoulder and a single whispered phrase to her aide. This isn't finished. Because Camilla's reaction wasn't fury, it was a calculated, icy retreat. Because she had a secret of her own. She had waited decades to be accepted, from mistress to consort to queen. and just when it seemed she had finally claimed her place, Anne tore it away with one letter. But Camilla wasn't going to be shamed quietly. In a midnight phone call to Charles, she reportedly said, "If your sister wants a war, I'll give her one." The silence in Clarence House didn't last long. Within hours of being denied entry to the Queen's Chapel, Camilla's composed facade cracked behind closed doors. What aides witnessed was not sorrow, but fury raw, unfiltered and personal. She wasn't just insulted, she was betrayed. She demanded a statement, something to publicly discredit the letter Anne had enforced. She argued that this was never about spiritual sanctity, but about a sibling rivalry disguised in royal language. "Anne never wanted me here," she told her inner circle. "This is her final play, and she used the Queen's hand to do it." Behind the scenes, the air turned icy. Camilla placed immediate pressure on Charles to intervene. She reminded him of promises, some whispered in private, others spoken aloud during their long, turbulent climb to legitimacy. He had assured her she would walk where Elizabeth walked, that she would have access to the rooms that shaped the monarchy's soul. But now, those promises were turning to dust, blown away by the force of one sealed letter. And worse, Charles said nothing. His silence, meant to diffuse tension, only deepened the fracture. The next morning, the family gathered for communion in Windsor. Camilla did not appear. Her absence wasn't just noted, it was felt. A royal consort refusing to join the House of Windsor at prayer was more than symbolic, it was seismic. Palace aides scrambled. Her team cited spiritual hostility and emotional fatigue, but few believed it. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Camilla no longer saw herself as welcome. And in royal circles, unwelcome equals unworthy. Later that evening, she was seen leaving Clarence House alone, trailed by press officers trying desperately to prevent photographs that might confirm the growing rift. Her face, once trained to remain neutral, betrayed the storm inside. And while cameras snapped away, Charles remained inside, locked in a briefing where his own demeanor told a different story. Shaken, distracted, the monarch torn between two women, one of blood and one of bond, both refusing to back down. What few understood was that this wasn't merely a squabble over ritual or rooms. This was a war over legacy, over who truly inherited the Queen's spiritual authority. And Camilla, having climbed the mountain of public scorn, now stood alone at the peak, only to find the crown she'd reached for wrenched from her grasp by a single act of loyalty from the Queen's daughter. But while Camilla prepared to retaliate, the Queen's Chapel held more than sacred walls. It housed a secret archive that even Charles had never seen. Behind the altar, tucked into a hollowed stone compartment, was a ledger bound in red leather. It wasn't royal accounts or sacred hymns, it was Diana's private notes, stored by the Queen herself. A record of sorrow, betrayal, and forgiveness. But one entry dated July 1997 changed everything. No one outside the Queen's innermost circle even knew the ledger existed. It had been smuggled from Kensington Palace to Windsor under the strictest discretion during the final year of Diana's life. The courier was not a footman or aide, but a trusted clergyman, hand-picked by the Queen. Elizabeth had insisted the writings be preserved, not because of duty, but out of reverence. Reverence for a woman who had been dragged through the fire and still chosen grace. Reverence for the pain Diana bore in silence, while the world labelled her unstable, dramatic, difficult. These pages told another story, unfiltered, blistering, heartbreakingly raw. In those entries, Diana poured out reflections on motherhood, monarchy, and betrayal. Some passages read like prayers, others like confessions, but the thread was always the same: her desire to protect her sons, and her growing fear that she was being erased before her time. And then came the one that shook the royal household to its foundation. Dated just weeks before her death, the July 1997 entry read, "There are forces surrounding me, unseen yet always female, smiling in public, steering in private. I feel shut out, not by walls but by lineage. And her, always her, shattering what should be sacred. There was no name, but no one needed one." The her was clear. When Elizabeth read those words, something shifted. According to palace insiders, she wept quietly, alone, not for herself, but for the storm she had allowed to form around Diana's life. She placed the ledger in the chapel, beside the altar Diana had donated in secret, It was not meant to be an archive, it was a shrine, a silent space of truth. And Anne, too, knew of its presence. She had read every word. To her, it wasn't just a diary. It was Diana's spiritual footprint, one that could not and would not be erased by anyone, least of all the woman Diana had feared would one day rewrite her legacy. But now, with Camilla's presence growing louder and her proximity to power becoming unavoidable, the existence of this ledger became more than symbolic. It became dangerous. One entry, one phrase, one page was enough to upend everything Camilla had spent years building. And as whispers of the ledger began to circulate beyond Windsor, Camilla's position, already bruised, began to crumble under the weight of a voice no longer alive but still roaring through ink. Now, with the ledger exposed and Camilla's position crumbling, Charles made a decision that stunned even his inner circle. Alone in his study, King Charles III called for the Archbishop of Canterbury not to pray, but to confess. Sources reveal the king admitted that his mother never truly forgave him and that her chapel decree was a final attempt to guard the monarchy's soul from unwanted hands. The confession didn't come easily. It had taken days of silence, of watching his wife unravel, of hearing his sister's voice ring like judgment across corridors once ruled by restraint. Charles, now king in title but still a son in mourning, found himself consumed by two ghosts: the queen he had spent a lifetime trying to impress, and the woman he had loved at the cost of his mother's blessing. The weight of both collided in that quiet room as he faced the one man who could bear witness without consequence. "She died never seeing me worthy," Charles whispered, according to a senior aide. "Not as a son, not as a man, not as a king." It was a moment that shattered the image of stoicism the world had come to expect. Charles, the eternal heir, had finally become sovereign, but the throne felt more like a punishment than a prize. He broke protocol by halting the next scheduled chapel service, requesting a private delay without explanation. Royal advisors were stunned. It was unprecedented, bordering on scandalous. But Charles insisted. The chapel had become a battlefield, and he could no longer pretend he was only a bystander. Days later, he asked Anne to meet him in the palace garden. What was said between them remains unrecorded, but what emerged was a single, searing line, later repeated by an aide. "You carried her judgment. I live under it." It was not anger, it was surrender. The king knew that Anne hadn't acted alone. She had only lit the fuse his mother had left behind, and now he was the one standing in the ashes, torn between loyalty and love. For the first time since the funeral, Charles considered limiting Camilla's role. The idea, once unthinkable, now lingered in his mind like an ember refusing to die. Removing her from key ceremonial duties would be a public earthquake, but perhaps a necessary one. It wasn't about punishment, it was about preservation. The monarchy could not afford another fracture, not after the Queen's wishes had been laid bare in ink. Those close to him say he wept alone that night, not for power, not for image, but for the cruel paradox of being king and son all at once. One palace insider captured it best. He wasn't just mourning Elizabeth, he was mourning Diana too. He was a king mourning two queens. But while Charles wrestled with his conscience, Camilla was already preparing her next move, and it was nothing short of a counterstrike. Denied access to the Queen's chapel, Camilla began building her own. Not in stone, but in ceremony. She launched a quiet operation inside Clarence House, a team tasked with redefining her public image and reshaping history itself. Her first order: erase the term consort. From now on, it's just Queen. For Camilla, the exclusion from Elizabeth's sacred space wasn't just a personal blow, it was a public humiliation. But humiliation is only devastating if you accept it. Camilla refused. Within 48 hours, a strategic task force was assembled behind closed doors, composed of former political advisors, image consultants, and narrative engineers. Internally, they were dubbed the Velvet Rain. Their mission was simple: deconstruct the past, reframe the present, and dominate the future. Camilla would not be remembered as the woman who was shut out of Windsor. She would be remembered as the queen who rewrote the rules of legacy. Step by step, they executed the plan. In speeches, on printed programs, across official communications, one term began to quietly vanish consort. In its place, simply Queen. No clarifications, no footnotes. And at every public event that followed, Camilla introduced subtle yet deliberate changes to the ceremonial rhythm. Flower choices were updated, music selections altered, even royal processions trimmed of long-standing symbols tied too closely to Elizabeth's reign. She wasn't merely distancing herself from the Queen, she was editing the monarchy's living memory. Inside Clarence House, staff were ordered to remove all photographs of the Queen's chapel and any items visibly associated with it. Royal correspondents noticed the shift. Long-standing traditions like seasonal floral tributes tied to Elizabeth's favourite hymns were quietly discontinued. What Camilla couldn't access, she would erase. What she couldn't erase, she would outshine. Whispers soon followed that Camilla had been scouting remote Scottish locations, private lands suitable for building a spiritual sanctuary of her own, a place untouched by history's judgment. A chapel without shadows. It was symbolic, of course, but so was everything she had fought for. If she couldn't be queen within the walls Elizabeth built, then she would craft new ones of her own. And then came the leaks. Carefully placed, surgically targeted, and unmistakably manipulative. Media headlines began casting Anne as cold, immovable, even vengeful. Articles portrayed her as the stubborn relic of a bygone monarchy, a woman so obsessed with her mother's memory that she could not evolve. Camilla, by contrast, was positioned as a modern spiritual matriarch, a queen for the present, unafraid to change the past. But Camilla underestimated one thing: Anne wasn't done yet. And her final act would put the entire monarchy on notice. In a rare speech at a closed royal dinner, Princess Anne raised her glass not to Camilla, not even to Charles, but to the woman she said carried this family through storms and silence. Then, looking directly at Camilla, she uttered words that chilled the room. She was our mother, not yours. The evening was meant to be intimate, a Balmoral gathering stripped of titles and protocol, where family could reflect on the woman whose absence still echoed through every corridor. But when Anne stood up, there was a stillness that gripped the table. Her words, unscripted and heavy with emotion, cut through the atmosphere like a blade. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply invoked the truth, raw, uncomfortable, undeniable. Elizabeth had not only ruled the nation, she had held her family together with a quiet force that no one, not even Charles, had fully grasped until she was gone. Anne spoke not of crowns or titles, but of values, sacrifice, restraint, loyalty. She didn't name Camilla, but everyone at the table felt the weight of her gaze. "Legacy is not taken," she said, "it's earned." The words hung in the air like smoke. Edward looked down. Beatrice blinked back tears. Across the room, a hush settled, because for the first time someone had said aloud what many were thinking, that the monarchy was no longer unified, that grief had split the House of Windsor into factions, that there were now, unmistakably, two queens in the room, but only one was missed. Camilla, seated in silence, didn't respond. She didn't have to. Her face, tight and unreadable, revealed only one truth: she had just been outflanked in the one arena she couldn't control: blood. For Anne, this was not strategy. It was reckoning. A final, public affirmation that Elizabeth's true successors were not defined by marriage or media, but by memory and loyalty. And that memory, Anne made clear, was not Camilla's to inherit. What followed was a quiet reorganization behind palace walls. Aides began coordinating appearances to avoid placing Anne and Camilla in the same frame. Invitations were carefully managed, speeches edited, photos selected with meticulous care. What the monarchy wouldn't say publicly, it had started to enforce privately. The divide was real, and the people knew it. But even in this fractured silence, one final twist remained: a hidden clause in the Queen's will that no one saw coming. Weeks later, as estate lawyers finalized the Queen's remaining affairs, they uncovered a clause, simple, elegant, devastating. It read, "My private chapel shall remain as it was in grief, not spectacle. It is not for those who ascend it, it's for those who kneel." And beside it, a final instruction: entrust it to Anne. Only Anne. It wasn't part of the public will, nor included in the official estate announcement. This was a sealed addendum, locked within a private codicil known only to the Queen's closest legal advisors. While the palace scrambled to restore normalcy and contain the growing fractures, this one clause brought everything to a halt. Because it changed everything. The chapel, once assumed to fall under the Crown's domain, was, in fact, never meant to transfer with the throne. Elizabeth had made it clear. This space was not part of the monarchy. It was a piece of her soul, bound not by state but by sorrow, and it would not be handed to those who wore the crown, but to the one who had carried her pain in silence. The legal confirmation stunned even Charles. It left no room for negotiation. Camilla, by written royal decree, was barred from participating in any chapel-related service or ceremony for the rest of her life. No wreaths, no dedications, no commemorative rites. The Queen had locked her out not just in action, but in law. And the message was unmistakable. Legacy was not a matter of marriage or title. It was about trust. And trust, in this case, had only one heir. Anne, presented with guardianship, said nothing publicly. She didn't gloat, she didn't clarify. She simply accepted the responsibility and chose silence as her answer. In the weeks that followed, she visited the chapel alone. No press, no procession. Just presence. The same presence she had kept for decades, holding her mother's confidence without question or agenda. Her silence, once mistaken for coldness, had now become her power. Charles, perhaps out of grief or perhaps out of guilt, did not challenge the clause. Instead, he honored it. He ordered the chapel closed indefinitely. No tours, no televised memorials. It would remain as it was, quiet, untouchable, sacred. The Queen's final wish, upheld not through power, but through blood, not by decree, but by devotion. And so it stands, a chapel no one enters, a letter no one forgets. A Queen whose silence spoke louder than any crown. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.